What happens when Ukraine turns Russia's Belgorod stronghold into a burning trap? At 700 hours, on August 23rd, Ukrainian forces from the 58th Separate Motorized Infantry Brigade unleashed a devastating strike on the Belgorod border region. Using drones equipped with fiber optics and TM-62 anti-tank mines, they destroyed not one, but two Russian bridges, leaving convoys and entire units in flames. This was no random attack. It was precision and one of the most daring attacks on Putin's army.
It is one of the most daring and devastating Ukrainian attacks on Russian troops since the start of the war.
The first target fell near Kurnik Khutor, close to the Kharkiv border. Ukrainian scouts had spotted unusual activity by Russian units, revealing caches of mines and ammunition hidden under the bridge supports. The 58th Separate Motorized Infantry Brigade immediately launched FPV drones, each acting as a detonator for the TM-62 anti-tank mines secretly planted by Moscow's forces. The resulting explosion obliterated the crossing, sending steel and concrete into the air, leaving Russian convoys trapped and their supply lines severed. Minutes later, a second bridge near Novopetrovka in Belgorod Oblast suffered the same fate. Drones darted beneath the structure, locking onto mines arranged as a massive engineered charge. When triggered, the bridge erupted in flames, collapsing into the river below. Entire columns of Russian trucks burned, soldiers scrambled in chaos, and the route that had long carried reinforcements and equipment into the border zone vanished in seconds. These bridges were more than just infrastructure. They were lifelines for Putin's forces, enabling rapid troop movement and logistical support across the Belgorod front. Ukrainian forces leveraged FPV drones with surgical precision, turning Moscow's own TM-62 mines into ticking bombs. These low-cost drones, guided via fiber optic cables, could navigate under heavily reinforced bridges, bypassing Russian surveillance and air defenses. Each drone acted as a remote detonator, igniting mines planted by the enemy themselves, creating an explosion equivalent to tons of conventional explosives. The brilliance was not just in the firepower, but in the economy of the operation. Inexpensive, reusable drones caused maximum destruction while minimizing Ukrainian casualties. Coordination was critical. Scouts first identified unusual Russian activity and hidden munitions under bridge supports. Once the location was confirmed, drone teams deployed simultaneously, targeting specific charges. Explosions were triggered in sequence, while forward observers monitored the aftermath for additional threats or follow-up strikes. This was no luck. It was military choreography, combining engineering, reconnaissance, and timing into a devastating precision strike. Belgorod was the linchpin of Russian logistics in the region, a staging area for artillery, fuel convoys, armored brigades, and rapid troop rotations into eastern Ukraine. So with both bridges gone, mechanized columns are stranded, supply trucks idling, and artillery batteries left without resupply. Commanders are forced to reroute under fire, stretching lines thin and increasing vulnerability to follow-up strikes. Russian doctrine emphasizes secure, uninterrupted supply chains. Belgorod was considered untouchable, a psychological anchor for Moscow's forces. Its sudden devastation sends a clear message. Even the heart of Russia's forward operations is exposed, and units once confident in their rear area safety are now trapped, demoralized, and on the clock as Ukrainian forces watch and strike with precision. The operation demonstrated the lethal efficiency of low-cost drones paired with enemy munitions. By turning Russian mines against them, Ukraine amplified damage while minimizing risk to its own forces. Analysts note that Belgorod served as a critical buffer for Russia, a staging ground for operations deeper into Ukraine. Its bridges, now gone, represent a major strategic setback for Putin, showing how precision, ingenuity, and timing can cripple even heavily defended positions. For decades, Russia claimed its borders were untouchable, but Ukraine just shattered that myth at Belgorod, proving the motherland is far from safe.
There's certainly been a degree of mythology in Russia that the motherland is safe and no enemy will be able to harm it. Well, Kyiv has shown that that's not true. They can reach anywhere.
Ukraine's precision strikes are no longer isolated hits. They follow a relentless pattern. Each drone, missile, artillery salvo is aimed at severing Russia's reinforcement routes, leaving entire units stranded and trapped in hostile territory. Belgorod was just the latest example. For months, Ukraine has been striking deep into Russian logistics. Just 3 months ago, SBU special forces admitted they mined the Kerch Bridge, the critical road and rail link to occupied Crimea.
second time in 2 days that the SBU has been claiming responsibility for a major operation. Clearly nothing on the scale of the attacks on the Russian air bases on Sunday, but nevertheless a very important and significant target. The Kerch Bridge has been the object of Ukrainian anger and hatred ever since it was opened in 2018. It was a pet project of Vladimir Putin. He personally opened it just 4 years after Russia annexed the Crimean Peninsula. It formed a link between the Russian mainland and, of course, what Ukrainians continue to regard as occupied territory.
A pre-dawn blast launched water and debris into the sky, leaving the 12-mile corridor in an emergency state and halting Russian troop movements. Months of careful planning, engineering, and infiltration ensured maximum destruction, proving Ukraine can hit even the most fortified targets. Summer 2025 saw a similar pattern along the Kursk corridor. On July 15th, long-range drones annihilated a truck convoy, destroying ammunition and fuel, delaying reinforcements to Luhansk and Donetsk. 2 weeks later, precision artillery and loitering munitions obliterated a logistics hub near Ryalsk, Kursk Oblast, destroying warehouses of armored parts and ammunition, further turning Moscow's resupply plans into chaos. Fuel convoys traveling from Rostov to Luhansk were no safer. Drone strikes on June 12th burned multiple trucks and injured soldiers, disrupting mechanized operations. Rail depots near Milorovo fell under missile fire on May 27th, destroying heavy weapons and infantry reinforcements before they could reach the front lines. President Zelensky has made the strategy clear. Ukraine will defend its territory by every means available.
We know exactly whom we are dealing with. We will defend ourselves by every means available to us, available to Ukraine, available to Ukrainians. Not for a single moment did we want this war. We offered the Russians a ceasefire.
These operations show the message is not rhetoric. Ukraine is using drones, artillery, missiles, and even Russian-planted explosives to dismantle the enemy's ability to fight. Belgorod, Kursk, Rostov, Kerch, there is no safe corridor for Moscow's forces. It's clear Ukraine forces aren't fighting in random skirmishes, but with a calculated siege on Russian logistics, leaving their troops vulnerable. But the destruction of Belgorod's bridges was far more than just a tactical strike. It carried profound psychological consequences, both on the battlefield and on the global stage. Russian troops who once believed their rear areas were safe now find themselves under constant threat. The Belgorod strikes have shattered the myth of invulnerability that Russia has built around its supply lines, a belief that no area inside Russian territory would be touched by the conflict. A belief that has been strongly advocated by Putin himself.
И при угрозе территориальной целостности нашей страны, для защиты России и нашего народа, мы, безусловно, используем все имеющиеся в нашем распоряжении средства. Это не блеф. Граждане России могут быть уверены, территориальная целостность нашей Родины, наша независимость и свобода будут обеспечены.
The truth, however, has been laid bare. No place is safe, not even the heart of Russia's logistical infrastructure. Internationally, the Belgorod strikes send an unmistakable message. Ukraine is no longer retreating or playing defense. It's actively exploiting Russia's weaknesses, showing that even the most fortified positions are not safe. The strikes are a blow to Russian morale, not just for the troops, but for Putin's narrative on the global stage. For over a year, Moscow has painted the war as a fight for Russia's survival, using it as justification for domestic oppression and military aggression. The destruction of Belgorod's infrastructure puts that narrative into question. If Putin cannot protect his own borders, how can he claim to safeguard Russia's future? World Affairs correspondent put it best when said it's hard to overstate the sheer audacity of Ukraine's strike at Belgorod, hinting that these attacks were a message Ukraine is far from defeated.
It is pretty hard to exaggerate the sheer audacity of what the Ukrainians have just done. But there is a political message here. A colleague of ours from the Ukrainian service said that he was recently in conversation with a member of the government who told him that the problem with Washington was that the Americans had already decided that Ukraine had lost and that the Trump administration's entire strategy was based on that assumption.
After the brutal humiliation at Belgorod, Russia's response was swift and brutal. Putin's pride had been shattered, his military's competence called into question by a precision strike that not only destroyed key infrastructure, but also left Russian convoys stranded, isolated, and exposed. The Belgorod attack was a high-profile blow to Russia's logistical network, one that rattled Putin's regime at its core. In retaliation, Russia launched a vengeful offensive, aiming to restore its image and punish Ukraine for daring to strike the heart of its logistical capabilities. Putin's anger was palpable, not just towards the Ukrainian military, but within the walls of the Kremlin. His ministers and military officials came under heavy fire for failing to prevent the attack. In response, Putin ratcheted up the pressure on his defense chiefs to get Russia's military apparatus in full working order. Aircrafts, munitions, and reinforcements were to be ready no matter the cost.
The directors have told me so. Why are you fooling around?
It will be ready during this quarter based on the funds available under the budget.
I want all of this to be done within a month. What quarter are you talking about? Do you not understand the circumstances we are in? Please complete this work within a month. Agreed?
We will try to do our best.
No. Do not try to do your best. Please get it done in a month, no later.
Putin is keenly aware of the growing doubts about the might of his military machine. He had no choice but to act, fury blinding logic, even at the cost of heavy civilian casualties. In an attempt to restore morale and curb any dissent among his officers, Putin's next moves were calculated to terrorize, humiliate, and show the world that Russia would not back down. To avenge Belgorod, Russia unleashed one of the largest and most brutal aerial assaults since the early days of the war. It was a psychological strike as much as a physical one. CNN reported nearly 600 Iranian-style attack drones and over 30 ballistic and cruise missiles launched in the dead of night, targeting Kyiv and surrounding cities.
Your answer, one of the largest attacks on Kyiv since the start of the conflict. Nearly 600 Russian drones and 30 missiles fired overnight at the capital. In some parts of the city, people were under air raid sirens for 9 hours at least.
The attack began at sundown on August 29th and continued relentlessly until dawn, marking it as the second largest aerial assault in the war. The Ukrainian capital was plunged into chaos. For 9 straight hours, air raid sirens wailed without pause as explosions reverberated through the streets. Kyiv's 3 million residents were forced into basements, subway tunnels, and any shelter they could find. By the morning light, parts of Kyiv were burning, entire neighborhoods reduced to rubble. Ukrainian air defenses fought fiercely, intercepting wave after wave of missiles and drones, but the sheer number of attacks overwhelmed them. Civilians paid the ultimate price, with 18 confirmed dead, several children among them. Ukrainian first responders rushed to pull survivors from the wreckage, but the toll on the city was staggering.
9 hours, at least 19 people killed so far, among them several children. The youngest is just 2 years old. There are still rescue workers digging through the rubble, Becky. There was 500 rescue workers and 1,000 policemen on the ground.
But the symbolism of the attack was clear. This was more than just retaliation for the Belgorod strike. It was a message from the Kremlin, showing that Russia's reach extends beyond the battlefield, capable of striking civilian targets in the heart of Ukraine's capital. With diplomatic missions among the casualties, this was a calculated strike against the West itself. Russia's message was loud and clear: Ukraine will never be safe, not on the battlefield, not in its cities.
The ground, it gives you a sense of the scope and scale of this attack, which hit residential buildings, kindergartens. It even struck a European Union mission building and a building for the British Council. And both the EU and the UK have called Russian diplomats to ask them about these attacks.
The airstrike on Kyiv wasn't just about inflicting pain on Ukraine. It was a direct response to the humiliation Putin faced at Belgorod. In his mind, the attack on Belgorod had shown a vulnerability Russia could not afford. If Ukraine could strike so close to the heart of Russian-controlled territory, it meant there were no safe zones left. It was a crack in Russia's military facade. Putin, ever the master of retaliation, had to hit back with force, and he did so with total disregard for civilian life. This was a blow, not just to Ukraine, but to the international community as well. Russia's aim was to send a message to NATO and to Washington. You cannot interfere with Russia's power and expect to walk away unscathed. The Kremlin was reminding the world that while the West may help arm Ukraine, it was still Russia that controlled the skies and could bring terror to Ukraine's doorstep. Internally, the Belgorod incident triggered an immense political pressure on Putin. Within hours of the destruction of the Belgorod bridges, the Kremlin was forced to issue public statements reassuring the Russian population that everything was under control. The reality, however, was far from that. Russia's military had just suffered a major logistical blow. Supply chains were severed and vital reinforcements delayed. Entire units had been left isolated and vulnerable, caught between Ukrainian artillery and drone strikes. Putin's inner circle was in crisis mode. Military officials, desperate to salvage what was left of Russia's strategic advantage, were called into emergency meetings. There was no time for protocol. At the same time, domestic critics of the war began to question Putin's competence. For months, the Russian public had been told that their military was invincible and that any challenge to Russia would be swiftly dealt with. But the recent attacks on Russia undermined that narrative. Citizens, as well as, and opposition leaders, began to demand answers. The psychological toll on the Russian public was significant. They had been led to believe their military was untouchable, that Russia's borders were secure. But with Belgorod in flames and Ukrainian forces able to strike at will, that myth was shattered. And now, the consequences were no longer just felt on the front lines, but across the entire Russian population. The Belgorod disaster was a message Russia can't ignore. Now Putin's army is left scrambling. Hardened bridges, increased drone detection, and new supply routes. Russia will have no choice but to shore up defenses. But here's the truth. One misstep, one vulnerable point, and Ukraine will strike again. The pressure is mounting. Peace talks, which were already failing miserably, have now all but collapsed. Both sides continue to escalate, with no sign of a resolution in sight. The promises made by President Trump's administration to end the conflict seem hollow in the face of the escalating violence.
Russia's war with Ukraine is another conflict that the Trump administration has vowed to end, but efforts to do so are struggling to gain traction.
The war rages on, and the world is watching. Russia's survival is on the line. Time is running out, and Putin feels the pressure. The next move could spark an even greater disaster. But the real question is, who will break first?